The 2025 Goodreads Choice Awards nominees were released, and people in the book community are angry, rightfully, for several reasons. Alchemized, which is based on the fanfic Manacled, which features a relationship between Draco Malfoy and Hermione Granger, but it's mixed with their dynamic plus Handmaid's Tale. This fanfic was turned into a published book called Alchemized, and that novel alone is in the running for 3 different awards, along with 2 other Hermione fanfics turned into published novels. So the centering of fanfic turned trad pub, specifically Hermione fanfic, plus repeat authors in each category, the removal of middle grade awards, the removal of poetry awards, and most of all, the consistent whiteness and straightness of the nominated books are all reasons that people are upset at the Goodreads Choice Awards. And so a lot of us were discussing online and off about how trash consistently Goodreads proves itself to be. But Goodreads itself is not the problem. Goodreads is a great indicator of the problems in publishing. Every year it serves as a glaring reminder of what those specific problems are, so let's talk about them. Hi, my name's Rachel, and today a rant on Goodreads, but mostly publishing as a whole. You ever open the nominee list for a fantasy book award and think, hey, these all kind of sound basically the same? Sure, fantasy books have a lot of overlap, but this year all of us looked at the Romantasy Awards nominees list and said, wait a second, is the shortlist made entirely of repurposed Hermione fanfic? No, but 3 out of 20 nominees is unheard of and had us all shaking our heads. This is disappointing for a lot of the community, but for a variety of reasons, and not the least of which is that Miss Turfling in Chief is continuing to remain relevant, but also this is a sign of publishing taking a turn down a road where it further is proving that it's not looking to create a space for new voices and new stories, which is a major issue in publishing and has been for a really long time. Nothing against fanfiction. I love fanfiction, and I'm not against repurposing fanfiction into a traditionally published work. I say that with caveats. Lord knows if I could have repurposed my Lord of the Rings fanfiction that I wrote at 11 into its own original work, I would have. I wrote that thing on a laptop with very little juice on a table that was not meant to withstand my angsty fanfic writing at midnight past my bedtime. That poor table. Which brings me to today's sponsor, which is FlexiSpot. Behold, this is my new desk setup where I will be scripting all of my videos from now on. But this isn't just a regular desk. No. In this one, I can sit or stand. I personally edit all of my videos. I spend hours at the computer. So a standing desk has been heaven sent for me at this point. The standing desk has made my computer setup so much more comfortable for my hours spent on it. It has a weight-bearing capacity of 355 pounds, which makes it so that I can hold everything I need plus extra very securely. It is super stable, so even while I'm typing or changing the height, I don't need to worry about it wobbling around. It is such a help for my posture and my back pain, which means that my productivity is better. I can get the exact height at exactly when I need it, and all of this comes at a reasonable price point. But I also get to exercise while standing at my desk because FlexiSpot sent me their treadmill, which I have at the desk so I can write my Lord of the Rings fanfiction. I mean my video scripts. Stop it, I don't do that anymore. Doing all my work while remembering that I am 30 and exercise is in fact necessary now in order to keep my joints healthy. Once again, I have aged myself. The FlexiSpot treadmill comes with 9-level automatic incline adjustment, Bluetooth MP3 connection, and a 275-pound weight capacity and a 2-year warranty. Now the desk has a 15-year warranty and 30 days of free returns if you don't like it, but I love mine and I hope you will too. They're also having a Black Friday sale right now with up to 80% off on their products, and you also have the chance of getting 100% free orders to get great products at a great price for all of your work or fun setup needs. Check out FlexiSpot, but don't forget to use my code YTE730 to save an extra $30 off and get your own E7 standing desk. And leave a note saying Reads with Rachel at checkout. Once again, that's YTE730 at checkout for an extra $30 off. And thank you so much to FlexiSpot for the new desk and for sponsoring today's video. When we all saw this Romantasy nominees list drop and saw that it was not just Alchemized, but 2 other nominees, which are The Irresistible Urge to Fall for Your Enemy and Rose in Chains, they are both on the list. They're just like sitting right next to each other, just bop, bop, bop. I'll be honest, I was surprised for about 2 seconds. I was more disappointed because every year I stupidly hope that this won't be the case, but of course it was, where publishing continues to disappoint me. Of course, it's the exact same story every year. And there's layers to that joke because stories, but also because Rose in Chains is basically the exact same story as Alchemized. And as always, Allie Hazelwood's books are nominated, nothing against her. I'm just pointing out that they are often Raylo fanfic, and also she's in the running twice in one category, and the romance nominees list is overwhelmingly white and straight. So we're seeing the same problems year after year, and in fact, I'd go as far as to say that they are getting worse. There's three problems today. Well, no, there's three problems that I want to discuss today. The problems are happening every day, actually. That is the issue. And these three problems, I feel, show that Goodreads is a yearly November comes around and suddenly Goodreads shows us exactly what the problems in publishing are. So number one, obviously the whiteness and the straightness of the Goodreads Choice Awards. Once again, the romantasy category is 80% white authors. Meanwhile, attacks on DEI have gotten aggressively worse, especially with the re-election of a certain orange man here in my country. Number two, fanfic, specifically Hermione fanfic dominating the publishing space. Fanfic in general, like now being traditionally published, means even less action by traditional publishing, like the publishers specifically, to prop up original work and make space for new voices, especially, again, going back to point one, non-white, non-straight voices. Number three, this is going to sound boring to some of you because nobody wants to talk about this. That's not true. It's not true that nobody wants to talk about it. It's just that a lot of the community, the book community online, does not talk about this subject. And I'm begging that we do because it's sort of a canary in the coal mine. We need to talk about the way that publishing treats middle grade. It is hugely important. It is being overlooked. All of these things are not isolated, and they're not isolated to Goodreads. They're also not living inside of publishing as if it's like a vacuum. These things are happening because of the political climate. Every time I feel like I do a video, I sound like that guy from It's Always Sunny, where he's like pointing how it's all connected. It is all connected because these things are happening because of the political climate, and that cannot be divorced. That is context that entirely informs all of these things, which I'm sure really burns up the reading isn't political people. It just drives me bonkers. How are the decisions about the Goodreads Choice Awards even decided? Nobody really knows for sure. We used to kind of have some information on this, and there's like some older Reddit posts that I found explaining it, how it used to work, allegedly. So in 2023, it stated that eligibility meant they were books published in the United States in English, including works in translation. There's like a cutoff date for when you can be nominated. It's November through November. They allegedly analyzed statistics from the millions of books added, rated, and reviewed on Goodreads to nominate 20 books in each category. Opening round official nominees must have an average rating of 3.5 or higher at the time of launch. A book may be nominated in no more than one genre category, but it can also be nominated in the debut novel category. If I'm reading that right, then that means that they have since changed the rules because Alchemized is nominated in 3 categories, including debut novel, but also audiobooks and romantasy. An author may receive multiple nominations within a single category if he or she has more than one eligible series, so that's been like a long time standing rule. They did make changes. They removed in 2023, 2022 was the last time they had graphic novels, middle grade, and poetry, and they added in a romantasy category. Now, there really was no reason for them to remove the categories and make room for another one. They could have kept all the categories. People would have voted nonetheless. What's it to them? And yet they did away with them. The whiteness and straightness and the centering of the global north is an issue. This, again, cannot be divorced from the context of the attacks on DEI, despite the fact that I have watched authors throughout the year. Certain authors have said that DEI bad because white people need a leg up, essentially. And again, this is a trend because I've been watching white women specifically in the publishing space say DEI is a problem since at least 2020.
I like it. It's really good. Honestly, I don't care if it's good. I only care if it's diverse. It's diverse. How would you know? You're a white author. White authors know nothing about diversity. Is it inclusive? Yeah. Tell me you have trans characters or pansexual characters somewhere in here. I'm straight. I didn't feel comfortable writing about characters that... Well, I don't feel comfortable with your pronoun usage. What pronoun? He. But the character is a man. Are you sure about that? Did you ask your character? Why is the villain's skin darker than the protagonist? He's a shapeshifter. His fur happens to be black and brown. Sorry, I can't publish the racist book.
I remember looking at an agent and then telling me that they only represent people who aren't white. She might have cared about the narrative and the marketability of the book, but all of that was overshadowed by the fact that she wanted someone that wasn't white. You say, Lauren, that's just one agent. There's hundreds, if not thousands of them out there. Guarantee you 9 times out of 10, the agent will have written somewhere that they will give preference to people who aren't white.
Now that Trump thankfully has removed DEI from the workplace, I'm wondering if this will stand in the literary world. So, agents, are you still requiring to be in the Black community, the LGBTQIA plus community? Or do other authors finally get a chance now to be represented?
There's also famously the case of Kate Corain, who created a fake profile to admit that they were targeting authors who were people of color and that they were jealous of Molly X. Chung because there was a disparity in advances between Kate's and Molly's. There was also the case in 2022 where James Patterson said that white men face racism in publishing, which is hilarious no matter who says it, but James Patterson in particular saying it is hilariously ironic. And then in 2025, an indie press said that they were going to focus on male writers because men were being passed by. And yet, despite them thinking that they can't break into publishing because they're white, the Goodreads Choice Awards is a yearly reminder that this is all in their head and whiteness continues to be centered. The majority of publishing is white. Brianna N. Cox, an author, did all of the data, compiled all of the data surrounding the Goodreads Choice Awards for this year in this thread, and I will link it below. Huge thank you to Brianna for doing all of this work, and you should go pre-order her book. I did pre-order it as a thank you for compiling all of this data because could not be me. I can't do math. So Brianna says, the highs and lows of the Goodreads Choice Awards, a breakdown of all 14 aggregate categories without audiobooks. 75% women and femme writers, 29% queer writers, 29% non-American writers, 20% disabled and neurodiverse authors, 15% Asian, 9% indie, 8% Black, 3% Latine, 2% Swana, which is Southwest Asian, North Africa, 1% Indigenous, and 0% translated fiction. Nonfiction and horror are tied for the most overall diversity. Fantasy has the least diversity. Romance and romantasy tied for most women rep at 95%. History and biography and nonfiction tied for least women at 50%, which is still proportional to the population, so yay! YA fantasy and sci-fi has the most queer rep at 70%. Mystery thriller has the least queer rep at 10%. Science fiction has the most non-American rep at 50%. History biography with the least at 10%. Memoir has the most disabled rep at 55%, and romance has the least at 3%. YA fantasy and sci-fi has the most Asian rep at 30%. History, nonfiction, and mystery tied for least rep at 5%. Romance has the most indie rep at 50%. General fiction has the most Black rep at 20%. Fantasy and horror tied for the least at 0%. Horror has the most Latine rep at 10%. Fantasy, science fiction, mystery thriller, general fiction, historical fiction, nonfiction, memoir, and history tied for the least at 0%. Every category has no translated books. Brianna's takeaways were nonfiction and horror are tied for most overall diversity. Women are equally represented. Important to note that a queer author doesn't mean a book has queer content. The overwhelming majority of queer authors were bi, pan, femme authors. This is also dependent on openly identifying as queer, which doesn't cover all queer people. Disability and neurodivergent category was very broad. It includes autism, ADHD, mental illness, addiction, physical disabilities, chronic health, significant injuries. If I had been less generous, the rep would be much smaller. Physical disabilities in particular were very underrepresented. A lot of the diversity came from authors with intersectional identities. For example, YA fantasy is so diverse largely because of its authors being BIPOC and queer and having a disability. 3 categories covered, but still 1 author. Women, mostly white, a very specific subsection of queer people, bi, pan, and a very specific subsection of neurodivergent people, and a very specific subsection of Asians are the only ones proportionally represented in these awards. The Goodreads Choice Awards are fairly representative of traditional publishing and broader reading and book buying habits. So next time someone thinks diversity in books isn't an issue, show them this breakdown, and show them this chart, which comes from the Lee and Low Diversity Baseline Survey from 2023, which shows us that predominantly publishing is overwhelmingly white and straight and able-bodied. I also myself looked at the stats for the last several years from 29 to 2025 for romantasy and fantasy. And then before the romantasy category was created, there was a fantasy and then a YA fantasy science fiction. Every fantasy winner for all of these, all three of those categories that I just mentioned, every single winner for romantasy, fantasy, young adult, fantasy and science fiction, all of them for the last 6 years have been white, with Sarah J. Maas taking the majority of the winning spaces, but also authors that you'll recognize who are also white: Leigh Bardugo, Holly Black, Rebecca Yarros, V.E. Schwab, and T.J. Klune. As far as I know, only one of those authors is queer, but all of them are white. And predominantly, the nominees for those categories are white. So in 2019, only 3 out of 20 fantasy nominees were written by authors of color, and in young adult science fiction fantasy, only 4. In 2020, 4 for fantasy, 9 for young adult science fiction fantasy. You'll notice that that got a way higher number than the previous year, which was 4. In 2021, 6 for fantasy, 8 for young adult fantasy and science fiction. 2022, 8 for fantasy, so it's gone up from the 2 previous years, 9 for young adult science fiction fantasy. And then we hit a decline after this for the last 3 years, especially after romantasy came into the picture in 2023, and we only had 4 authors of color in 2023 and 3 for fantasy. So we have a romantasy category and fantasy category. In 2024, 3 for romantasy, 5 for fantasy. Certainly, this all reflects something that we find very concerning about the publishing industry. The author who said that agents, now that DEI is done away with, which is not what happened, agents are finally going to take manuscripts from white authors again, clearly is not living in reality with the rest of us, because we are seeing that this is an ongoing problem where whiteness is actually centered. One of the most fundamental issues in publishing is that the decision makers, which is editors, but also executives, and agents, which is agents, but also editors and executives, remains overwhelmingly white. The Lee and Low Diversity Baseline Survey, which I previously mentioned, says that almost over 75% of the publishing staff who responded to the survey was white. At the executive level, this is even higher. If those who decide which manuscripts get published and which don't already don't reflect a broad spectrum of lived experiences and backgrounds, then the stories that make it to the market will predictably skew towards what the predominant group perceives to be the stories worth publishing. If publishing is not diverse, how is it that the stories that publishing is creating can possibly be diverse? It is going to be reflective of the people working in publishing. So we need power redistribution. We do need initiatives for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we do need this data, like the data that we get from the Lee and Low Diversity Survey, because it tells us where we and who we are failing, and it will help us to get publishing to set concrete goals and track progress towards a more equitable publishing space. We also have a political climate, though, that does not want that. We have a political climate that is actively persecuting the very idea of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And it's just easier for these very capitalist companies to revert to what they consider to be the default, which are stories with straight white characters who are able-bodied, told by white people who live in the global north, specifically and predominantly the United States. With very few exceptions, this is typically what happens, and every year the Goodreads Choice Awards reminds us of this, even after publishing was supposed to have had that reckoning in 2020. So there was a lot of online discussion about how publishing fails its authors of color. We were having this big discussion about how publishing companies and publishing adjacent companies, so things like Book Outlet, I believe, and also Book of the Month, they were supposed to have been doing better after we had this reckoning in 2020, the summer of 2020, after the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Many of us were demanding, hey, publishing and publishing adjacent companies, You need to do better by your authors of color. When are you going to decenter whiteness? These attacks on the very idea of creating diverse, inclusive, equitable, and accessible places and spaces and systems and stories, publishing is not immune to that. You will see this in how books by and about queer, non-white people are produced, marketed, and distributed. The Trump administration's efforts to dismantle any and all DEI efforts and infrastructure which by the way, cannot be divorced from the broader wave of book bans. I mean, just look at this lady who is running for mayor in my county, who literally brings this up randomly when we're there to talk about books being banned. She's like, by the way, I'm not shitting on these ones for being DEI. These ones I just feel are pornographic, but like, don't worry, she'll be back to talk about DEI another day.
Don't confuse these books with DEI. This is not DEI.
These things are putting pressure on publishers to retreat and abandon marginalized voices. DEI initiatives in many federal agencies were aggressively scaled back or they were eliminated. It was removed from websites, entire programs completely dismantled. Trump and his cohort framed DEI as some kind of like ideological indoctrination that was not merit-based, like in its way of boosting people, which it is in fact racist to think that because somebody is not white that they have less merit than anybody else. But once you tell them that something that they are thinking is racist, they just immediately blow a gasket. It's interesting though, because white women predominantly are the largest beneficiaries of DEI initiatives, and also veterans benefit from DEI initiatives, and yet they say that they love veterans, and yet DEI initiatives that create places where veterans are supported are also now gone. This is what happens when you don't know what something is and then you attack it. They've done this with DEI and communism and Marxism. I could go on and on. The point is, this political climate where DEI has been demonized did not just affect Washington, it reached into institutions and systems that affect the reading community. So schools, librarians, education. So for instance, the douchebag who runs the Department of Defense, which is not called the Department of War, and you can't make me say that, Pete Hegseth decided to ban a list of books that he considered DEI from all Department of Defense educational activity schools, which are schools on military bases where military affiliated children are attending. Their libraries were affected by anti-DEI rhetoric, which plain and simple was just censorship. All it was targeting books by queer people, BIPOC people, queer people, people of color, and sometimes just white women. These efforts are not random. They are not living in a vacuum. They are a concerted campaign that is broad-reaching to erase or limit representation everywhere, starting with schools. So when DEI is delegitimized like that at a federal level, it creates a permissible environment for local politicians or state politicians to restrict texts that are controversial under the guise of protecting children or upholding traditional values. All of this just got lumped under diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we're talking about books like Tango Makes Three. The ABCs of Black history. Sorry, my dust jacket got ripped up by my kids. And if states are folding, if local politicians are folding, of course, money-hungry publishing houses will gladly also bend the knee. Publishers operate within a market, and their decisions are heavily influenced by like calculating what is risky for them as far as their bottom line, rather than them doing what is right, and often even doing what their customers are asking them to do. Their choices are going to be based on who is in power. So in this climate where conservative legislation and book banning activism are transforming what is acceptable, which DEI is being deemed unacceptable, publishers are going to feel like they need to limit their investment in queer stories and non-white stories, or sanitize how those stories are represented, like in the case of Love in the Library. Is that in this room? Let me see if I can find it. Like a specific case is Love in the Library, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So let me get back to my point. So they limit their investment, or they sanitize their existing investments in order to operate within the constraints of like whoever is in power. Publishing should make waves for the better and then chooses not to. So we see this For instance, with Scholastic, actually. So in the case of Scholastic, rather than like integrating all the time their books about race, gender, sexuality fully into their catalog, Scholastic decided, much to the backlash of a lot of us, to segregate their diverse titles from their non-diverse titles, and you had to opt into their diverse catalog if your school was doing the Scholastic Book Fair. The librarian would have to opt in. And I did do a video on this years ago if you want to go watch it. This is very upsetting for me because my kids love the Scholastic Book Fair, and this would have meant that like the book that my kid just bought at the book fair this year, that he just finished today and he's really excited about this one, this would have not been in the catalog if my school had not opted in. So, and many of these books simply featured like people of color, the characters that were people of color, civil rights leaders, queer people, which means that also a book like this is not a Scholastic book, but a book like Tango Makes Three also would have been opted out of, even though this is a true story about two male penguins who raise a chick together. So books like that are deemed DEI inappropriate and kept separate. And they argued that their business model required this compromise, but critics like myself, like a parent like myself who takes her kids to the Scholastic Book Fair every year, but also librarians, authors, free speech advocates, we were all criticizing this decision because it really was a betrayal and Scholastic just capitulating because they care about their bottom line. And they were, like, at best, fence sitting, which is not great. At worst, they were propping up and centering the feelings of bigots, which tracks because Scholastic, again, was wrong book, Rachel. This is a book about Maggie's family's own experience in a Japanese internment camp. I believe her grandparents, not her parents, right? Her grandparents. So Scholastic had asked her to remove the note about racism at the end in order for them to publish, if I remember correctly. I also did a video on this. Sorry, I didn't explain this correctly and it's bothering me. Scholastic wanted to license Love in the Library by Maggie Takuta Hall, which is published by Candlewick Press. And this is what happened. And then I go on to explain it further in the video. But Scholastic wanted to license the book is what I neglected to say properly here. And it has this author's note talking about how it was her maternal grandparents who actually experienced falling in love in a library in a Japanese internment camp. And Scholastic asked her to remove it, which is disgusting. Whose feelings are we centering there by erasing the truth? The consequences for our literary ecosystem, which includes readers who rely on representation, are profound. When publishers are not going to care about the consequences of the demonization and delegitimization of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility initiatives, and publishers are not going to care about the consequences. They are going to go where the money goes. For publishing to remain it's not doing great in the first place, but for publishing to become the inclusive space that it should be, it has to resist these tides of censorship and self-censorship, like in the case of Scholastic. And that means not just apologizing and reversing missteps like asking Maggie to censor her note about the racism her family faced, but structurally recommitting to diverse authors and their stories and the long-term work of doing right in publishing and representing the full scope of humanity the way that publishing should, even when politics makes it hard. But they instead make promises that they don't keep, like a lot of businesses did in 2020. Promises were made, promises were not kept, and Goodreads is again proof that that is true. What is also true is publishing is leaning away from new and refreshing stories more than they are willing to ever lean in. And it's disappointing to see the same thing over and over again without anything fresh being brought to the conversation, not just with 3 Hermione fanfics being published at once, but the stories I'm seeing in the romantasy category. I'm disappointed that Silver Elite is even in there because Silver Elite did absolutely nothing. That's just my opinion. I'm not shitting on its readers, but I feel like publishing knew exactly what it was doing when it picked up Silver Elite, which was a whole lot of nothing. I'm disappointed to see that Onyx Storm is in there because that even disappointed a lot of Fourth Wing fans. It drew out the story further in a way that was completely unnecessary. These are prime examples of how monotonous this is. Next year, Silver Elite's sequel will be on this list, this Goodreads Choice Awards list. And so will the next Fourth Wing book. And so will book 4 of Assistant to the Villain. We're seeing the same stories over and over and over again. It just is sort of exhausting to me to watch publishing do the same thing every single year and have the same Goodreads Choice Awards with the same plot and the same books and the same authors Girl meets boy, we are told that girl is smart, but actually girl is very not smart. Boy is rude and mean, and then sparks fly between them. But they are very horny from the beginning, but he is her enemy, but he's never really been her enemy. And also her parents are dead, and also there's a revolution. And it's not that these things are shitty on their own, it's just I never see any deviation in a way that feels new. Silver Elite and Onyx Storm are great examples of this. But publishing knows what works to keep us all in this cycle of adding it to want to read and add to cart and buy this special edition. But publishing has so much money. It's not that they need to stop doing it. It's just that they could do this and other things. Invest more in non-white stories, in queer stories, more stories written by authors outside of the global north. There's nothing stopping publishing from doing that. They could also just choose to invest in the authors they've already signed, but they often don't. They themselves could pave the way with all of the money and resources and manning that they have. As my friend Muddy says, if publishing wanted to, it would. And it doesn't. What publishing wants is shortcuts to cash. And this has created an environment where fanfics become traditionally published because they mean less effort on the part of the publisher. When Manacled, the fic that got turned into Alchemized, the published book, was pulled from AO3, it was one of the most popular fics on AO3. So you can see Lou grabbed me some stats. Look at the amount of hits this has in comparison to the most popular fic on the Germani tag right now on AO3. It has half. This is a work that needed no press or marketing, essentially. Because as soon as they said, this Germani fic you already love is being published, the people who loved it were already on board. That required basically nothing on behalf of publishing. This was already an extremely popular work of an extremely popular ship that had an extremely popular dynamic that the publishing industry, they just didn't need to do anything to get it to the popularity point that it is now. It was marketed straight to the Germani fans, but then they had to stop doing that, I think. It's a little unclear what happened there. But the fans already knew that it existed. They were dying to get it. And the author, Senlin Yu, published under the name Senlin Yu, which is their AO3 name. There was even less steps to divorce this from its fanfic roots. Publishing genuinely does not give a shit about divorcing it from its fanfic roots, it seems. Alchemized is so successful, and that creates a market. Now, the other books are also successful, but not in the way that Alchemized is. Irresistible Urge to Fall for Your Enemy and Rose in Chains. For some reason, Alchemized specifically is doing numbers. And the publishing understands that this is something that creates profit. Therefore, they are going to bet on similar things doing better than publishing being proactive and creating publishing industry that is not only full of original work, but less white and straight. Publishing could fix this themselves. They just don't want to. And also, it has to be stated that this is a work that continues to bring J.K. Rowling to the forefront of media and gives Harry Potter the platform that she should not have because of the harm that she causes. She is using all of her many, many dollars to donate to anti-trans legislation coming to fruition. So there is, an argument to be made there that continuing to keep her popular will only further seek to marginalize trans people. But the publishing industry, of course, is going to be more concerned about profit. And if they see something being profitable, they're going to do it again and again. And Alchemized was profitable. And so are other fanfics. I mean, just because it's not as profitable doesn't mean that Rose in Chains and Irresistible Urge did not do well as other fanfics. So if we think about the Allie Hazelwood Raylo fics, which I'm told that basically all of her, every time I review one of her books, people are like, no, this is Raylo too. And I'm like, I just didn't read Raylo fics, so I'm just not picking up on it, but I believe you. And I get the draw, you get these dynamics that are familiar to people that have already been trialed and tested. They already have such a huge following. You barely have to do any press, any marketing. And to traditional publishing, it doesn't seem that diversity is profitable enough for them to care about different narratives and investing in that and have to market them. Personally, I'm not going to be reviewing Alchemized because of several reasons. In part because it has 3 chapters of explicit sexual assault scenes that I'm told are excused by the narrative. I haven't read Haunting Adeline for a similar reason. I just don't think that I can handle it personally. I have talked to my friends who have been reading it, and we've been discussing this broader issue, which we are finding is common in books that derive from fanfic, which is that they are not standing on their own when they get turned into a trad pub book. Fanfic relies on our previous knowledge of the world, the plot, and the characters, And it is essentially an exploration of those themes with different twists so that those same things that we want to see, like the ship that we go to the tag for, can be read again and again and again with slightly varying dynamics. Good fanfics are fics that understand the source material so well and can play with it and show you a new shade to it, bring something new out of it. But this alone does not make a good book. Like a book and a fanfic are different. We go to them for different things. I read fanfic and I don't review it on this channel because the way that I review fanfic is different than how I review a published book. The way I even talk about it with my friends is different than how I talk about published books, because I have different standards for fanfic than I do for published books that have editors and have to like hit these, different, qualifications in order for me to feel like it was worth my money. Whereas fic is free and it has a lot more leeway because it's horsing around in a way that is often like very creative and fun. And I know what I'm getting into when I read a fic. A good book needs to stand on its own. A fanfic doesn't always have to, but a fanfic that gets turned into a published book has to do the work to differentiate itself from the material that it was based on in order to do that. And a lot of published fanfic works that I've seen fail miserably at that. So the push to publish fanfic is concerning for a lot of reasons, but I think it's kind of the writing on the wall. It tells us that the industry sees these stories that as fanfic are repetitive because they are fans exploring dynamics that they enjoy. They're turned into books that are like very similar to each other. So just like we had a wave of Edward Cullen's, think 50 Shades, and just like we had a wave of Kylo Ren, think, Ali Hazelwood's book, and what's that one fantasy book that was Raylo? I can't remember. Anyways, the point is, just like we had those, Alchemized is going to prop up a new wave of Draco Malfoys. And this is going to get more and more covert because a lot of people don't want to read Hermione fic because we want to be separated from J.K. Rowling and not prop her back up. However, I read Spellcaster, I reviewed it last month, and I got a ton of comments saying, I think this is just Ginny Draco fanfic. And of course, nothing was ever stated that this was Ginny Draco fanfic. I can't prove it, but the comments are dead set that it was. And it makes sense if I think about it, because the beats are there. Girl coming from a massive family meets guy who is an only child who hates her family and looks down on them. So she thinks he is her sworn enemy. It's set in a magical school, but still set in our world. And also it's set in a school where the students can't really leave, even though they're adults. The point is, it would make sense to me that this is a Ginny Draco fanfic, because if I think about it, the world does not stand on its own. It's like the bits of it that were fanfic possibly were erased from it, and it was never replaced with its own bones to stand on, which is why the book fell apart. The world doesn't make sense. The magic doesn't make sense. The politics of humans living in a world with magic users and their own politics is never explained. So it very well could be Ginny Draco fanfic and we wouldn't know. So then Spellcaster stops getting judged by its own standards in my mind. As soon as I saw that it might be fanfic, I started trying to fill the holes with Harry Potter, trying to make it make sense. And the problem is that even if it's not, J.K. Rowling is still being brought into the conversation because we default to thinking that magical school book with certain dynamics is any sort of Harry Potter fanfic. I'm not really sure how to fix this, other than I think that publishing has to do better when they acquire fanfic. And I'm also not really sure that the community is ready to have a conversation on what is going to happen when more and more fanfics from all kinds of different, original IP are getting turned into traditionally published books. But the community also isn't ready to have a conversation about how a lot of us, particularly white folks, have become complacent in our push for diversity of not only diversify our shelves with marginalized voices, but just different kinds of story. And obviously publishing, I've shat on publishing for most of this video, is not solely at fault here. I think they are at fault, but also it is on us consumers, the people who care about this, or at least claim to care about it back in 2020 when we were having these major conversations. We do need to bring back that urgency that we had about how this push from consumers is necessary. And we need to be more mindful of the choices that we make as consumers so that we are not fed slop after slop after slop. Because I fear that we've gotten a little used to mediocrity, both from stories, and obviously that's going to be subjective because what I find mediocre, you won't. But I think that we are accepting less and less from publishers who have the ability to give us more. And we're going to start seeing that more of the Goodreads Choice Awards as a result is going to look homogenous. Like next year, how many Hermione fanfics are there going to be? 5? 7? The same enemies to lovers story now with Malfoy instead of Rhysand, and I would rather stop hearing about both of them. The last thing that I want to point out that Goodreads proved to me is that there is a distinct hatred of children and their right to stories, and it's actually starting to become really grating to me. Again, this goes back to the political climate and back to the Scholastic Book Fair thing and book banning. We have to talk about this because the overall theme, again, of this video is Goodreads is an indicator of publishing's problems. And part of that we readers often overlook is the treatment of middle grade. Middle grade books are books that are aimed at readers from like 8 to 12. They have been a cornerstone of children's publishing for quite some time now. Age distinctions are important. They help librarians have the right books get to the right kids. Right now, a really popular middle grade series is, I have it right here actually, Dogman, which is a graphic novel. My kids are obsessed with Dogman. Other books that are middle grade are Ban This Book by Alan Gratz. There's also Minecraft books that my kids have gotten really into, which are middle grade books. That middle grade books have more illustrations than like young adult books, and my kids really into these like half illustrated, half written works. It's important that they exist because the middle grade like age range is when readers develop lifelong reading habits. But today, middle grade is facing crisis after crisis, shrinking institutional support and less sales, and they are also facing their books coming under attack. So the aforementioned Ban This Book by Alan Gratz, a middle grade book about a little girl who tries to check out from the mixed up files, only to find that that book, her favorite book, has been banned from her school. This book about book banning was challenged by resident county book banner of Clay County, Florida, Bruce Friedman, who says that it is age inappropriate, which no, it's fucking not. Some of the players in the reason why middle grade is under attack includes who owns Goodreads, which is Amazon, and also groups like Bruce Friedman is a part of, which is No Left Turn in Education, who works in tandem with other groups like Moms for Liberty. Bruce Friedman is friends with a New Jersey book banner named Dan Kleinman, who runs Safe Libraries. Dan Kleinman once called me a groomer because I said that I wanted people to stop banning books. Okay, Dan, I guess. Somebody told me to sue him, but he's already being sued for calling other people groomers, so I guess I should just get in line. Anyway, the point is, middle grade is under attack by a variety of groups, and Amazon and Goodreads are not helping. Awards help books get on the map a little bit more. Maybe not for you, but for some people. So for many authors, recognition like Goodreads nominations does help with discoverability. And Goodreads was, I don't know, I guess they just fucking don't care anymore. They just decided in 2023 to no longer carry certain categories, including poetry, graphic novel, and middle grade. So no more awards for any of those categories. Why? Who's to say? Certainly not, Goodreads who did it. Middle grade books suddenly became less worthy of serious recognition. And it was a sign that Goodreads is leaning more towards commercial incentives. So they added the romantasy category. Okay, fine. But they didn't need to take away the middle grade category. They could have kept it. So what kinds of books are being elevated and why became the question. Goodreads, again, is owned by Amazon. These decisions reflect and reinforce Amazon's broader market priorities. If middle grade is deprioritized, then less attention flows to middle grade books, making it harder for middle grade titles to break through, especially books by underrepresented authors. This also can't be divorced from the context that indie bookstores are under attack by whom? Amazon. Amazon loses money on books because they sell them at a cheaper price in the hopes that you will buy from them rather than your local indie store so that they can create a monopoly on books. Meanwhile, kids age 9 to 12 are not buying books on Amazon. They're not perusing Amazon looking for a book to read. Print sales for middle grade books have been in decline for years. Publishers and booksellers, like Barnes & Noble, for instance, are increasingly cautious about what they determine to be risk, which I understand that for indie booksellers, I really do, but for publishing, these big 5 publishers, there's no reason why they can't prop up more middle grade books the way that they prop up Dog Man. They just simply choose not to, so that they can make the most money possible rather than doing some good with all of those millions and billions they have. Barnes & Noble decided to purchase fewer middle grade hardcovers to carry in store, especially for emerging authors, and this disproportionately affected marginalized authors. So you can walk into a Barnes & Noble and certainly find Dog Man, but you're going to have a harder time finding new titles by marginalized authors who are debuting in middle grade in a Barnes & Noble. So these large retailers are tightening their curation, which reduces shelf space for more diverse and newer middle grade stories. And so we have reduced sales, and then publishers become even more cautious. And then you have the overlapping issue of censorship of middle grade books, or attempts at censorship at least. Middle grade books about non-white people, queer people, or even just about book banning itself are increasingly under attack by these conservative groups who want to whitewash shelves. Just today, I was talking about how Bruce Friedman, who challenged this book, also challenged a beloved middle grade book called Amari and the Night Brothers, which I loved. I gave it to my kids and to my nieces. He said a bunch of incredibly racist stuff, making up a situation in which it's actually fine to justify racism towards Black children because of racial stereotypes that he concocted an entire scene in his head over. So even beloved middle grade books are under attack by right-wing interest groups who want to whitewash educational environments. And who do you think that publishing is going to side with if this gets higher and higher up in power? I mean, publishing, again, did not care when Department of Defense educational activity schools banned a bunch of books just for being diverse. So if they think that the books are going to get banned and not be able to sell to schools, do you think they're actually going to pick up these books in the first place and sign these authors? Another way that schools find out about books and get interest from the kids into the books is school visits, and these are also under attack by interest groups who attack both middle grade and picture book authors. And this is not one or two, it's multiple. Think about what happened to Jerry Craft, the author of New Kid, Safa Suleiman, a Palestinian-American children's author whose school visit was canceled by Bellevue School District because she wrote a blog post about her relatives who live in Gaza. Her book, Hilwa's Gifts, is just a tender celebration about family and belonging, but the cancellation reflects how certain identities are perceived as risky. This also happened to Janan Martari. It also happened to Sayantani Dasgupta.
My book, The Ghost Forest, which is the third book in the Secrets of the Sky series, is coming out in a week. And so I was supposed to go on tour, as one does with a new book. Except I just heard from my absolutely lovely publicist, 2 bookstores have canceled school visits and public events with me next week. One at least has admitted that it is because of the pressures of a certain book banning hate group.
I mean, it's just instance after instance of children's picture books, but middle grade especially, coming under attack, and these authors having their visits canceled, especially authors from diverse backgrounds who are being penalized a lot of the time, not even for what's in the text itself, but for their personal histories or political views. And again, this goes back to what that woman at my school board said.
Don't confuse these books with DEI. This is not DEI.
What's up? I did a piss poor job of explaining what I was actually trying to say here. So the woman at my school board, her name is Julie McGill. She said something demonizing DEI, which we were there to talk about 2 young adult books. Just for context, I don't want you to misunderstand what I'm saying here, because again, I didn't word this very well. We were there to talk about 2 young adult books, Identical by Ellen Hopkins and Blankets by Craig Thompson, and she called the books pornographic and inappropriate for children, but then also made sure to let them know that they weren't DEI, which she also demonizes, and I'm sure she'll show back up when inevitably we do have a challenge for a middle grade book to talk about how it's DEI, right? What I wanted to point out to you here is that the way that these people think is so bonkers, because she says it's not about DEI. Also, this isn't censorship.
It's not about censorship either.
And then she says this.
Let's also talk about the authors. Maybe it's not banning the books. Maybe it's banning the authors that are putting out this garbage.
These cancellations and bans are not happening in a vacuum. They emerge in a cultural environment where politically motivated right-wing interest groups are pushing schools to sanitize their entire environment to meet a particular ideological idea of what they think is best for everyone, even when the parents, like me, do not consent to this. And a lot of times the authors themselves are also parents. So when these middle grade authors from communities are denied school visits, they lose critical exposure and connections with young readers who may have a hard time finding a book that they are interested in. More books is the better option. More visibility is the better option. And Goodreads taking away the entire middle grade award led to less visibility. So they should bring it back. They won't, but they should, so that they don't continue to play a part in this cycle of continuing to suppress middle grade stories. Without Goodreads Awards for middle grade in that particular category, authors are losing yet another opportunity for their books to be spotlighted in a very high visibility and Amazon adjacent platform where you can just click over and go buy the book on Amazon itself. And this may lead to Barnes & Noble starting to pick up more stock again. All this does, removing this and stifling middle grade and shoving it to the back burner, pretending it doesn't exist and delegitimizing it, is create an environment where book banners are further getting their way because there's no incentive to pick up these books. And in fact, they have more of an opportunity to attack them, especially the ones written from marginalized authors, leading to more cancellations of school visits, more removals, more suppression. And then if we're not creating an environment where middle grade is valued, we go back up to publishing in this cycle. Publishing is less likely to acquire these stories in the first place, so they simply don't get told. And whose stories are allowed to be told, whose visits are welcomed in schools, what gets preserved in institutional memory, this deeply matters. And it's alarming that this is being allowed to happen. It's interesting to me that the community constantly, and I mean constantly, is having people come in bad faith and saying, I saw a middle schooler reading Icebreaker. If you are not having the conversation about the chipping away at middle grade and how censorship advocates have come in and tried to take out the middle grade genre, and how Barnes & Noble has added to this, and how Amazon has added to this, and how Goodreads has added to this, I don't want to hear about your feigned outrage about some middle schooler somewhere that you believe read Icebreaker. If that happened, it did not happen in isolation. How are the kids supposed to know about the books if we are not fostering a community where those books, the actual middle grade books, are being propped up? You better start having that conversation before you start talking about Icebreaker, which has never been shelved in middle grade shelves, but okay. Middle grade does matter, and I do wish more people would talk about it. Readers 8 to 12 often don't just pass through these books, they really live in them. These are the first stories where kids really grapple with their identity on their own, with friendship, with justice, with imagination. So when representation shrinks in that very particular age group, it is further isolating for not just the authors, but the kids who don't get to read their stories. These books are part of a very precious developmental moment for these readers. I'm incredibly thankful for middle grade books as a mom of middle grade readers right now. It's a crucial creative space for authors. And right now that space is being squeezed further and further by market consolidation from Amazon, deprioritization, deplatforming done by Goodreads and Barnes & Noble, and politically motivated censorship campaigns done by special interest groups that remove books from the hands of kids whose parents don't even know that this is happening for the most part. This all combines into a system that is especially damaging for authors of color whose stories are already marginalized and now face an amplified risk. So if we care about the future of reading and about the stories that children from every background deserves to see, then the industry needs to go back into investing in middle grade and supporting middle grade authors. More visibility, more investment, and more defense. We need to be defending these middle grade books when we see them getting challenged by book banners, because it will not stop at middle grade. It will encroach further and further into the publishing industry until it becomes homogenous. And I think that we've talked about how the book industry becoming homogenous is really the problem here. Overall, that seems to be the overall theme. Okay, that's all I have to complain about for today. If you made it this far, leave your favorite middle grade book down below if you can. Let's see, we'll do something related to this. There's a wave on here, so leave a wave emoji for the Dogman book if you made it this far into the video. Leave your issues with Goodreads down below. Yes, I know that we should all download Storygraph I agree with you, but somebody made a really good point where Goodreads is not going away and we do need it for visibility for marginalized authors. That is true. So I do think that like I'm going to keep using it in order to like get the visibility out there. Again, like visibility, especially for middle grade, is like a real problem. But I do understand. I do plan to use Storygraph more in the new year. I just always forget about it like 3 months into the year, and then I stop updating on there. But making it my goal in 2026 to make sure to regularly update my Storygraph. But also, I do think that we should continue to put pressure on Goodreads to be better. Not only is it bad for like diversity, but also their interface is trash. It's so bad, and they are not incentivized to do better. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for watching. Comments and questions go down below, and I will see you next time. Bye. And before I go, I have to say thank you for being a friend to my Therapy Bills patrons. I will say that these no longer show up on Patreon in alphabetical order, so sorry about that. And those thank yous go to Lex, SJ, Eric, Peggy Lou, Quinn, Rain, Scarlett, John E, Alexander, Samar, Ashley H, DJ Rocktopus, Kaleno K, Emerald Dodge, Ellie, Minby, Steph B, Lemon Jelly, Mixer Boneless, Lily, 3 Raccoons in a Trench Coat, Lady Chips Loves Pride, Call Me Kodiak, Ree Mirage, Katya, Melissa, Kai Brecker has not read 6 of Crows, Lex, Megwin, Maddie Miss, Not So Secretly a Skeleton, Jory, Piloting SRN, Bex, Fox Waifu, Charlie Bear, Ricky Strong. Thank you all so much for being here and for being a friend. And a quick thank you to my Potato Starch Marxists, Evie, Carlin, Paige P, Sean, Sarah the Bear, Jill, Talia, Corwin, Andy Mations, Darren, Tito Phoenix, Might Be a Magpie, Martin, Artie the Ninth, Hannah C, Shamed, Ava, Malara, Rachel B, Rebecca, Baywing, Amanda, Lustful Octopus, Lady Kittybug, Angelica, Jenny G, JM Tennant, Jay is on Olympus, Laughing Cat Dog, Dorothea supports public education, Nicole G, Colleen, Sarah H, Sheen Onion, Fox Club, Danielle M, Kendra, Sakoria, Kayala, Sadie Selby, Bookish Rabbit, Caitlin M, Rosie Thorns, Penny Chilling, Katie L, Lou Siri, Aaron with 2 E's, Jen Michelle, LP, Jojo Bookish, Jessa Sue, Lazarus Ray, Casper, Genderqueer, Jelly V, Lauren G, Man Eating Plant, Kate W, Sakia Lume, Lindsay M, Gadarn, Dilf Enthusiast, KMTV, Kaylee Carpenter, Alejandra, Desiree Michelle, Darius, Triple M, Saintbringer, Bookish B, Bookish by Jenna, Althea, Megan, Francis, Kate B, Plague Carrier, Jackalope Max, Queen Cereal, Pandemonium, Mataraptor, Rosemary K, Drive By Thinker, Juicy Wizard, Sophie L, Barry B, I like my women like I like my books thick, Mima Who, Katrina, Unicorn Jenny, That One Cute Chick, Hurry Sing, Myth Lesbian, This Is Not a Trap, Laura is Angry, Rhea Slagle, Morgan, Celeste, Macy Jane, Aaron S, Danita M, Cosmic Frog, Jesse, Rach, Kayla Alexander Kenny, Ren, Natural Blues, NM Rap, Che, Jing, Catuary, Taz, Miss Fox and Arda, Mac, Junie for Now, Gabby Z, T Foxbones, Pi, Adian, Mia, Fishy Fish, Chloe M, Luke has sleep token brain rot, hell yeah. Kath, Kellen R, Blubbles the Fish, Cass Plays, Jesse M. Thank you all so much for being here and for being a friend.